Welcome back to the Mobile and Park series. This is part five, where I want to talk about my experience with renovating park owned homes. So, in part one, I just talked about why people invest in mobile home parks. Part two is I talk about my mobile home park. Part three is I talk about due diligence. And part four is where I talk about what to expect when you take over a park. So, in part five, I want to talk about my experience with renovations. And boy, oh boy, was I wrong and too rosy when I initially did my plan. So my initial goal was to renovate two homes per month, and I wanted to start with the easier fixes that costed me around maybe $2,000-3,000, and then rent those out, and then eventually I'll get to the end where I'm renovating those larger ones that required $10,000. So my property manager, he actually used to run a construction company. So as a result, he had a lot of connections to workers, handyman, but they only want to work on an hourly basis. So we had a team of four, two leads who I paid $12 an hour, and then two workers who I paid $10 an hour. And the leads would be the more skilled ones. They would help guide the cheaper workers. So I would have one lead in each home, and then each lead would have one of the less skilled workers with them. And in the beginning, it worked great. It was very cheap. We were fixing up about two homes a month. And the funny part was the initial homes that we fixed up, the first four actually, they would live in themselves. So they'd fix up a home and then they would live in the home. And then they would repeat the process for the first four homes. So it went pretty smoothly in terms of fixing it and then renting it out, right? So it worked really great for the smaller cosmetic fixes. But where the issue happened was when it got to the larger projects. So it costed $10,000, let's just say minimum. And what was happening was it was taking a lot longer because it was more complex. Number one. Number two, it was summertime. So it was getting really hot and humid, like 100 degrees plus. So you'd be drenched in sweat when you're renovating the park. So that slows people down. And number three is they start to lose motivation. And then number four is we start having a lot more turnover. So when you're kind of dealing with workers who get paid on an hourly basis, they get paid every Friday. It's easy for them just to drop everything and go somewhere else, right? Whether they were leaving out of state for their girlfriend to follow their girlfriend, whether they got a higher paying job that maybe paid them 11 or $12 an hour. So when you're managing a renovation crew for mobile home parks, unfortunately, it's like there's constant turnover. I think I had like five people join and leave, right? So over the span of like a year. So it's very common. And this is why a lot of the mobile park operators, they like to have a renovation team in house to prevent this from happening. But if you don't have a renovation team in house, then you basically have to deal with this turnover, right? So, like I said, it worked great. But once we hit those bigger homes, they were taking a lot longer. So they were taking like, I think it took them 2 months to fix up one really large value at home. And as a result, if you pay someone an hourly basis, obviously if you finish in like 2 weeks, it's cheaper. But if it takes you 2 months, it costs way more money. So that moment, I had to pivot from I'm gonna pay you by the hour to hey, I want to pay by the job. Give me a bid, and I'll pay it by the job. But as a result of doing that model change, because these people like to be paid on an hourly basis, they get paid every Friday, and then they spend their money, right? But by the job, you get paid like half up front and then half at the end. So it's a little bit more inconsistent income. So once I switched to that model, it made it faster for me. It's going to cost me more money, but it also created turnover because those people only liked working on an hourly basis versus if I paid them, obviously every Friday, it got easy. So that created more delay, right? Where I had to, maybe wait a month or two to find a new crew to give me a bid to do the job. So that's kind of one of the downsides. I wanted to hit two homes a month, rent it out, and then just keep on renting these out, and then eventually get to the point where I could maybe sell some of these homes on a rent to own lease over like maybe 5 years because unfortunately a lot of these tenants they can't afford the newer homes. Number one, and number two is um, it was a little bit tricky because I got seller financing on the park. The other owner owned those homes, so as part of the contract with the seller financing, I couldn't sell those homes because obviously, if let's say I were to sell those homes off, and maybe make like $20,000 per home, for example, or get $20,000 per home. And then let's say I were to default on the loan, the prior owner would take over the land and basically have no homes, right? It would be a bunch of tenant-owned homes. So because of that, they actually wrote specifically that I couldn't sell any of those current homes that were there. But obviously, I could bring in new homes and sell those and rent those, do whatever I want with those because those are my homes, right? So all I could do was fix up and rent those homes out, and then potentially put them on like a rent to own lease over the span of 5 years. And why 5 years was because my loan would balloon in 5 years. So at that point, I would, not be, I'd have a new loan, and then I don't have to be restricted by that limitation. So that was basically my option. And what I learned was, yeah, that the Southeast is mostly a renter's market, and that most they can do is a rent to own model. And more in a later video, but the success rate for a rent to own contract is not likely because it's a different mentality to be a renter versus a homeowner. You're either one or the other, unfortunately, and there's nothing in between. So, we had a lot of people who, failed out of the rent to own contracts. But anyways, back to the renovation. So, obviously a lot of delays. And I think when I did the initial due diligence, I anticipated around $300,000. I actually tacked on another $100,000 as a reserve, but I quickly blew through that $400,000. And I still have a lot of renovations to do because things got more expensive. Workers wanted higher wages to retain them. Supplies and materials got more expensive and took a lot longer. So as a result, everything went more expensive and took a lot longer. And the longer things take, when you're paying an hourly worker, it's going to cost you more money. So I'll underestimate that. I wish my property offsite property managers set my expectations up front a little better. Given they've been experienced in the industry, but at the end of the day, they want your business, right? Like they were managing the part for the prior owner, and they're managing the part for me now, and as a result, they want to kind of paint a rosier picture, just like brokers, right? They want to paint a rosier picture so that you buy the property and they get their commission for the property manager, they get their property management fee, as well as they get the consulting fee on top of that, right? So with that, you're basically spending between $5,000 to $20,000 a month just in renovations. If it's the bigger renovations is about 10,000 each, and I think it ended up being like 12,000 sometimes per home to 15,000, depending how much work needed to be done. And remember, when you get the initial bids too, it's just a guesstimation. But once you start actually ripping things out and actually repairing it, it's going to cost more, which is why I jacked it up from 300,000 to $400,000. So, that's been my experience. So to kind of summarize this all together, I think hourly workers work if it's a small cosmetic job. But when you have hourly workers, there's going to be a lot more turnover. So you're going to get used to bringing in new people. But then once the job gets too big or it's a huge project, it's better not to pay on an hourly basis because they're going to go slow. They're not motivated to work any faster. Just get bids, pay by the job. But the moment you switch to that model, the current renovator handyman that you have or team they have, they're going to leave. And since they're renting units as well, I'm not going to get as much. I have to rent out those units again. So just expect that. And sometimes there's like delays in getting a renovation team, right? Especially when you're like in a smaller city. It's going to take a little bit longer to get people. But fortunately, since my property managers manage 70 parks, they have teams that float through multiple parks, but it's going to cost you more money, right? And it might cost you some time, and time is money, right? Especially when you're doing, huge renovation and value add parks. So, and then the next one is, whatever the cost is, anticipate to cost a lot more. I typically say like 25% more than what's estimated. And then it's going to take at least like 25 to 50% more. And that's been my experience of both my apartment complexes as well as my mobile home park. I think it's a little more accentuated with mobile home park because the materials is very specific to mobile homes, and that takes even longer to get here sometimes, right? Like versus for a regular apartment, you just go to Home Depot, Lowe's, and they might have that equipment readily available. So you might expect delays if you need a new window, for example. It's a specific window made for that mobile home, and it might take a while to get there. So overall, just wanted to share my experience with renovating park-owned homes, and hopefully you found value, and hope to see you in the next one. Thank you so much.